Hi, and welcome to The Fault Line, a CMG consulting podcast exploring the pivotal moments where business strategy meets real-world pressure. Hey, everybody, welcome back to the newest episode of The Fault Line, CMG Consulting's podcast, where we talk about where strategy intersects reality and a bunch of the different factors that make that an interesting topic. Today, we've got a great guest, David Bland, and I'm going to dish it over to him before we dive into our topic for the day. David, why don't you introduce yourself and let our listeners know who you are and what you're up to?
Certainly. Thanks for having me. My name's David J. Bland. I'm out here in Northern California, and I help people and companies make decisions under extreme uncertainty. So it's an interesting niche to be in. I would say I'm there because I have a hard time dealing with uncertainty myself. So I've developed all these tools over the years, and it just so happens that billion-dollar companies also enjoy these tools. And I help them either save money by cutting things they shouldn't work on or help them commit and go forward and make money on things they should. So happy to explore any of that with you all today. And again, thanks for having me on.
So excited for this topic. Kim's already got a smirk on her face for anybody who's listening and not watching. Kim, why don't you kick off the conversation?
Yeah, I mean, to me, this is one of my most looked forward to episodes just because people that don't make decisions make me crazy just in my personal life and my business life. And so talking about decision velocity and what it takes to make decisions quickly and what we can potentially miss out on if we don't make decisions quickly is, the age-old kind of analysis paralysis. I feel like this is the opposite of analysis paralysis. And this gets us into, how do we make decisions with just the right amount of information is kind of how I think about it.
Go ahead, David. I'm curious to start with maybe, how did you get into this? You mentioned that you struggle with uncertainty yourself. When did the light bulb go on and you're like, hey, I might be able to make a living at this and also help other people?
Yeah, I kind of fell into it. I'm a designer by trade, and then I ended up working in startups out after I graduated with my design degree. And I realized really quickly, you do almost everything at a startup. And I was doing design work, and then I was doing software work, and then I was in front of these giant banks because we were a B2B fintech startup and trying to explain how we integrate into their systems. And I just had a knack, I think, for explaining really complex things to people in a way they would get it. And I think that's part of my design degree. I think it's also part of, I used to write poetry, and I would try to break things down into smaller pieces and really kind of put them back together. So I think all of that just happened to land me in a spot where I'm between different functions quite often, and I'm trying to explain things and get people going in the same direction. And after, I would say, the third startup I joined, I thought, well, maybe try something different. And I'd made a lot of advising and consulting friends over the years. And they said, hey, come to the San Francisco Bay Area and help us work on doing this at big companies. Like, how do we explain things? How do we get them going in the right direction? And that was 2011. And ever since then, I just ended up working with another client and then another client. And before I know it, it's 2026, and I've been doing this for quite some time now.
Awesome. So as you told that story, I kind of love that because I think the blend of design training and an affinity for poetry is something that is not often voiced. And at the same time, good poetry is really an intentional exercise with language. The distillation down to pure essence, the sort of agonizing over rhyme, meter, but also the specific words. And, that I can see how that would blend into a very human-centered design training and rigor to sort of manifest empathy and be very careful about the approach and the explanation. So feel free to correct me if I'm playing this back the wrong way, but that's how I took it. I'm curious right now, as you reflect on some of these things, one or two instances where you felt like it was that ability to distill and be clear that really was, profound for your clients and might be a lever into some additional areas of conversation as we roll forward.
Yeah, I would say I find what is called like my growing edge. And it's tough to play there because it's like I kind of know what I'm doing, but I also maybe this will go really poorly. And I remember very vividly, I was kind of leading my first sort of transformation with one of Expedia's companies in San Francisco. And I'd gotten to know like Eric Ries over the years, who wrote Lean Startup. And he's like, "Hey, I need help with GE." And I thought, "Oh, wow, I really have no business going into GE at the corporate officer level, by the way, and trying to help them navigate things." Like I had very little context of what I was getting into. And part of me was just like, "Yeah, just do it. I mean, they're going to be better off with my help than without it, and we'll find our way through it." And I think the idea of being able to say, "Okay, here's where you're stuck. What's our riskiest assumption there? How do we design a test to go learn about that?" And just coaching them through it, advising them through it. I didn't have to be a domain expert. I mean, we were doing everything from deep sea exploration to hiring processes for different offices. Like it was all over the place. But I found out when I came out of that, and there are some things I could have done differently, of course. But I felt like, oh yeah, I can do this. I can be put in a situation where I don't have to be domain expert, and I can give myself permission to be okay with that. And that was sort of a pivotal moment, I think, in my career. And then after that, I was able to jump into many different types of companies and not feel completely overwhelmed.
I think one of the first time that I met David and we talked about this when we last connected, it was a workshop where he had us designing a doctor's office and kind of from the patient experience perspective. And I can remember you talking about you don't have to be a doctor to like be able to design this, right? You're thinking about it. Everybody's been to a doctor's office. So you have enough expertise, right, as having lived that experience to design what you would want it to be. And that's kind of stuck with me ever since. I definitely come from the perspective of I'm not the domain expert often in the room helping other people figure out problems. So the the ability to get them to make choices or to just move to action at all is incredibly important.
And for me, the trick there and what you articulated, David, is it's okay to not be master of the subject matter, but to be the broker because you're the process perspective, right? Here's the approach. I am steeped in how to go move through complexity variables, the idea of sufficiency to make a choice versus, knowing the specifics about deep sea exploration. Um, you know, I, I had a similar experience when I joined BP years ago. I didn't come out of the oil and gas industry, and I joined BP literally a few weeks before we had a big incident in the Gulf of Mexico. And in that instance, my contribution to a great extent was to look after our customers and make sure that they had the kind of information and support they needed. But I was also able to leverage a comfort in ambiguity and chaos to help with things like scenario planning and preparedness, even in a very volatile situation, to be uh, creating a sense of momentum, which generated for the team a sense of some agency and stability despite all of the uncontrollables swirling around them. And I'm kind of curious, as you think about your work, how that set of themes might play in as you're engaging with folks and thinking about, if we go back to the title of this episode, decision velocity, like how quickly can we make a decision that we can live with? And, how do we think about risk factors and other things there? I don't want to pile too much into this because we'll have more, but, if you could maybe speak to that a little bit, I think it'd be helpful.
Yeah, certainly. I think with decision velocity, maybe thinking of it almost like a formula, right? So clarity times confidence divided by complexity. So when we think about clarity, it's shared foresight, aligned goals. When we think about confidence, it's evidence from our assumptions testing. And with complexity, it's often organizational layers, unclear ownership. And so what I'm seeing is this kind of slowing down of decision making inside companies where it almost like builds up, builds up, builds up, and then it becomes this very high stakes critical decision we have to make with a lot of pressure. And we all know we make great decisions when we're on a lot of pressure and very emotional. That's the best time to start making
Yeah.
like really sound decisions. So I think just giving it a name I didn't coin it, but it's something I've landed on over the years. And the idea of giving people almost like thinking tools to work through this. So, I often use my what I call EMT, which is extract map test, which Kim went through when we did our workshop together. It really is just trying to simplify and say, okay, can we look at our risk? Can we structure it, and then can we share it? And then we can go test it. How do we break it down into really, really simple things? Because I find myself sometimes getting caught up in well, we need to give them more information. We have to make it more prescriptive. We have to give them more, steps and make it more and it's always more. And I think I've been trying to, over the last couple of years, make things simpler. Let's go back to the principles here. Let's make it simpler. Let's back off on giving them more posters of things to follow and steps. Can we make it simpler? And that's been really enjoyable for me. Is to kind of challenge myself to make it simpler and also help my clients get meaningful results out of it.
I love the simpler part because it's almost like less frameworks, more logic, right? Like a lot of what we do in this space is just putting logic into place. Like assessing risk is a very logic-based activity. Like what can I live with? I was talking earlier about, pre-episode about being on jury duty, and the one of the attorneys had to describe what reasonable doubt meant, right? So like reasonable doubt is an assessment essentially of risk, like what was possibly could happen or could go wrong. And you're right. We have too many processes and frameworks. And if we expect people to know which one of those to pull off the shelf at any given time, they're going to choose the wrong one or fail or get into, too much of a swirl, and they won't make a choice to move forward. And therefore, like pulling from my agility background, until you actually get something in the customer's hands, you won't know if what you chose was even correct. So we're delaying that even further.
Although risk assessment is a very rational process, talking about risks generates an emotional response for a lot of people. There's a fear factor there. And, I'm curious, David, how you might respond. I've used the soundbite repeatedly through my career. Let's scale the experiment so that a failure is instructive, not destructive, right? And I try to blend that with sufficient fidelity to learn, right? We're not looking for perfection right out of the gate. So let's not stack the choice or the decision to move forward with a false sense of confidence that we've optimized. What we're actually trying to do is just have a sufficient level of fidelity that we can make a decision, understanding that even if it falls flat on its face, we're going to have learned something and we can progress, and sort of compartmentalizing the evolution there. Uh, for me, that harmonizes pretty well with agile thinking. It harmonizes really well with human-centered design principles as well. So again, as you're, yeah, got any like horror stories where somebody just refused to sort of accept or adopt that and continued trying to stack things and thereby delayed making a choice, which is a choice unto itself?
Oh, so many horror stories. I think, yeah, also, I'll share what I can. I think taking a step back though, I don't think it's a coincidence that I was drawn to design thinking and also to agile and also to lean startup. I don't think it's a coincidence I get pulled into things where I feel like, okay, these can complement each other and we can come out of this in a better spot if we blend these together instead of just going all in on one. So I feel like Agile is great at iterative delivery when you kind of don't know the solution, but you're trying to iterate through that. I feel like Lean Startup is great for um, sort of like you don't know the problem that well. Also, design thinking is great for really get customer empathy, and then you can blend them. So I try not to get in like methodology wars or anything anymore as much as I used to, but I do think blending them
Those
together.
T-shirts are still in the back of your closet, though.
Yeah, it's interesting how you get drawn into those very easily. But I think when it comes back to horror stories, I would say it's usually a mindset issue. We've been taught in schools that we find the single right answer, and I wrote about this in testing business ideas. I was almost worried about putting this in. I was like, well, I wonder if my editor's going to let me put this one in. But I basically, I don't think it's like a 2-page rant, but it was very much like, look, we're taught in school, especially Western, here in the US, that we have to find the single right answer. And then we get into our job and we're rewarded for finding the single right answer and we get promoted for that. And then you kind of like build your whole mental model of things this way. And then you're leading a company and it starts to unravel a bit because you can't be the single right answer for everything that's going on in your company. You have to be able to create more leaders inside your organization. And when I think about this, I feel as if we are we're challenging that a bit when we go into a company and we say, "Oh, it's okay to be wrong," or "We're just
Mhm.
going to test and find out." Like no, no. I'm where I am because I had the answers. People look to me for the answers, and I've been rewarded my entire life for being correct. And you're saying, "Oh, it's okay to be wrong." You have to be very careful of how you frame things and realize that you can give them tools and sticky notes all day, but it's really a mindset thing. And so I find, I won't say them horror stories, but I would say when things unraveled, um, it's usually because of that. It's because we didn't want to go find out. And we didn't want to know the answer. We didn't want to have evidence that conflicted our worldview and what we thought we should build.
We just had a guest on in 2 episodes ago that was talking about using data to make decisions, but making sure that you're not basically cooking the data to give you the answer that you want, which is aligned with what you just said at the end there. And I I mean, I see this time and again. I still work in the transformation space, right? So I'm working with mostly marketing teams on new ways of working. And even in the engagement I'm working in now, they're like, but can you tell us the right way to do it? And I'm like, but there is not one way. And the other thing that makes me uncomfortable, even as a consultant, is, oh well, Kim's the expert. Uh, I've know what doesn't work. I've seen a lot of what doesn't work, and here's what I'm here to help you not do what doesn't work, right? So that right and wrong, just that is kind of drilled into us, makes complete sense to me.
There's also an aspect that I think, Kim, your example, where it's like people are looking to you for the right answer. It's a way to, in some cases, sort of hedge on accountability. Well, they told me to do it, right? I think a different thing, and David, you kind of spurred this PTSD for me, is as people ascend to positions of authority and influence, they build a sense of self-esteem around that path. And there are a couple of things that can happen. One, you can ascend to a position of influence and be dislocated from the evolution of what's happening on the ground, right? So there's a temporal aspect that says, oh, well, 7 years ago when I was in your role, well, 7 years ago, AI wasn't as big a thing, right? So stuff is different today. And that's hard for people to internalize. And I think there's also an element, and for me, this is always a theme around trust because, you know, we throw around terms like innovation and breakthroughs. And as Kim is fond of reminding me at times, to achieve a breakthrough, you got to break something. And um, and this idea of right and wrong forces a binary that's not usually accurate. Like frequently, there may be a different path, and the different path might be the innovation. It might be the step change. It might be the transformation catalyst for an organization. But to get leaders into that mindset, they've actually got to trust their team. It's not that the team needs to earn their trust. It's that they actually have to sort of manage their own inclinations. And, I'll put my hands up here and just open the fingers and let go.
Well, and
Um,
they have to trust their teams, but they also have to be working within a system that values making kind of small decisions to learn, and they have to be building the environment for the people that work for them to do that. Like so many conditions have to be true for that to work. And I think sometimes that's why, working in transformation or working, teaching teams agile ways of working sometimes is more successful in the micro, right? In the really small instance, but can start to fail when you try to bring it to scale into the organization, is because the environmental conditions just are never quite right because of all the preconditioning we have.
Yeah. And David, I want to bring this back and get your perspective on something that Kim just touched on, is this culture of enabling or condoning decision making. Because I my hypothesis on this would be that dispersed ability to make choices is actually an enabler of resiliency for the organization, and it accelerates the ability to respond. I'm curious, what your take on that might be, as the expert in the room with us here today.
Yeah, I mean, coming back to culture, I do think, I don't take LinkedIn super seriously, so if you follow me there, I often post, memes and things. I try to educate people, but I have my specific take on things. And then one of the most popular ones I've done recently was I was talking about J curves. Like it's like, oh, you have to dip in productivity and everything before you extend. And what I drew though was like we never actually make it through the dip because our leadership changes or something else, or we reorg. And so it's like we come down and we start to hook up, and then we go down again and we go down. So it's like a giant slope of of performance in the company. And some like consultants didn't take it very well. But my point was, you have it's interesting when I go into big orgs and, even back when I was doing agile stuff, back in the day, it was, "Oh, give me the exact steps of the whole plan I need to follow to be agile," when you're like, "Wait, agile is all about iterating through a s wait,
Can I
what?"
have the
Like,
anti-agile plan to being agile? Yeah.
exactly, like, give me the 5-year plan to be agile, and so I still see that need for certainty inside companies. I'm also seeing this interesting, I mean, this wave of AI, of course, we're all dealing with at the moment. And I was even writing about this today where it was like, you hear leadership say something, oh, we need a standard set of data. Everyone needs to make decisions off the same set of data. That's really important to us. And at the same time, they'll say, we've mandated everybody to use AI, and everybody's built their own tools inside the company that all do different things, and they're all going in completely different directions. So we have like these competing forces right now, I think, inside our companies where it's really hard to make decisions at the pace of change. And we need to take a step back and think through this versus just being reactive. And so I do think, I don't know if AI, the way I'm seeing it being used, it's not necessarily helping people make better decisions right now. It's definitely helping you build faster and create prototypes faster and maybe streamline some backend processes to be more efficient. But I don't see it being used to reduce risk. And that's where I'm playing, like decision making and risk and AI. And I'm finding some headway there of here's how we frame risk and here's how we use AI to help us do this. But I feel as if there's just this whirlwind inside companies right now of this fear of missing out on AI adoption. It's kind of all over the place. It almost reminds me of the .com era a bit, in a way, with tech. And I, you don't have the luxury of just not making decisions in that environment. So how do you rethink how you're making decisions or push decision making to people that have the information versus trying to pull up all the information to yourself and then make the decision?
I mean, I think in some ways, AI can even be slowing decision making down because we have access to so much more information faster that we're evaluating volumes more than we would have maybe previously. And so we're even potentially making it slower, and we're looking to somebody else, a tool in this case, a technical tool, to take the burden of the risk away from us.
Yeah, there's an aspect of AI that just feeds this idea of there's a right answer, right? If we just give it enough data, it'll figure it out. It'll tell
Yeah,
us what
I
the
keep
right answer
modifying my
is.
prompt. I'll get the answer I want, right?
I think I'm going to take this in sort of an odd direction. So, for me, the joy of AI in some ways is the speeding up of transfer of information. Um, and I think there's an element of using AI to help with process, to help with interaction, not to provide the answers that could be helpful. And here's where the odd turn comes in. Back in the day, I was responsible for new products for a large consumer packaged goods company that made insect control stuff, bug killers, right? So what did I do? I went out and I dove into how ants and termites and other sort of colony type insects actually use a set of simple rules that make them capable of manifesting complex choice. And it's a concept, and I don't want to equate humans to little six-legged critters, but there's an element that I've taken away that I think is good, which is help people understand some of the binary choices that if they're on the front line in a sales team or in customer experience and customer support, or they're doing innovations, it's like, is this going to help or hurt? Is this going to create or mitigate risk? Right? Does this make us money or cost us money? Right? There's a handful of choices there that when you put them together, allow for, oh, therefore, and a choice can be made. And, when we try to overburden everybody in the organization to be super duper sophisticated and think of every consideration, right? If you got somebody who's 3 years out of business school and you're trying to have them make a recommendation on something that's truly being overcooked, you've got to sort of step back and reflect, because that to me, and I'm watching your head nod a little bit, David, that's one of those use cases where it's like the illusion of sophistication is actually getting in the way of progress, if that makes sense.
It does, and I don't think we need 100% certainty to make decisions. We're very rarely going to have that, and so I also think we can't pick winners early on of what's going to work and what isn't. And I think come back into the right answer, the single right answer. I've been promoted. I'm a domain expert. Therefore, I can look at these opportunities we have and pick the ones that are going to win. In reality, that doesn't work. It doesn't even work in startup land, where VCs spread their bets over hundreds of startups because they know it's probably going to take about 250 investments to hit that one big return, unless you get lucky. And so what I'm trying to instill inside these companies is look at our stage gate process, look at our decision making process. Can we generate enough evidence to move forward and make these decisions along the way versus trying to pick winners and then being surprised at the end of the process. So I'm really trying to pull that more upstream. And that's a lot of what I'm doing. I'm not trying to replace their entire flow. It's just more of, can we? I've had a lot of success with the desirable, viable, feasible language coming back from design. So the do they, should we, can we? Can we weave some of that language to make sure that we're not missing risks along the way? So, for example, your early risk is probably not can you build it? You can build probably anything. So, your risk is probably around the customer. It's probably around your value prop. It's probably around your pricing. Can we start testing at least some of those assumptions earlier on instead of like snowplowing that risk to the end of the process? And that's what I've been doing a lot, is looking at how companies promote these ideas and how they're making decisions on ideas, which ones to launch. And I think a good example of this would be my work with DuPont over the last 3 or 4 years. I just wrote a case study on that, where just by cutting things that didn't have market need, we saved $12 million. Just by cutting things that, the switching costs were too high, or the need just wasn't painful enough for them to pay enough. And then the ones that we've promoted through there and we committed after we went through assumptions mapping and all that, those have so far generated $24 million in revenue. And I'm not saying that I'm taking credit for all of that, but going in and just applying this critical thinking process of, should we move forward with this or not? What evidence will we need to see? And back to Kim's point, not just taking the data and making it look like it's going to be a success, but really genuinely digging in and saying, look, if this doesn't make sense, let's free up people to work on something else and no one gets reprimanded or fired or put on some kind of performance improvement plan. Like, none of that
Mhm.
happens. It's just we own up to the fact that we shouldn't move forward with this idea.
Yeah, and I think the leadership team of an organization has to own that, because I've heard organizations say, "Well, we're going to continue doing this because it's somebody's job." And, what would they do? Well, what's the possible what could they do? Like, that should be the question we should be asking. If this thing is not adding value, what could they do that would add value for our customers or clients or members? Gary, you hit on something a few moments ago that, I've been working on. two versions of kind of steering committee setups for different parts of different organizations. And when we give them a scale of like, does this provide value to your customers, like 1 to 5, inevitably you've got people who are always going to choose a 3, or you've got people who are like, oh, it's like a 2.5. Like, people can't make the choice when you give them a
They're afraid
scale.
of the wrong answer,
Right.
right?
And they're afraid of the wrong answer. And so, like, making it a binary decision makes even some of those conversations easier. Like, it either provides value or it doesn't.
Exactly.
You can answer that question much more easily, which then gets you to, okay, now we've got a choice. It's providing value. So we're going to build the thing, based off of a couple of other criteria, maybe, so that then we can really understand did the value we assumed really land with our customers.
There's a theme also, both in your comments, Kim, and David, in the story that you shared, which I think is worth touching on, which is there are alternative areas of focus. There are options because, as you talk about a new product development portfolio or pipeline, one of the insidious things that can happen as people cost reduce and try to become more efficient is they narrow their focus down almost to where there's a daisy chain. And when people don't perceive that there's an opportunity to do something else, to your point, Kim, or we've got 6 different potential things to move forward. If they feel like the one thing they're working on is existential, then all of a sudden everything becomes precious. That's when stage and gate process, DuPont is big company, big capital decisions, right? You've got to progress through the stage, get to the gate, make your proposal, get approval, move forward. If you've got no alternative, if the death of this initiative starts to feel existential, then gates aren't used as a way to reflect on best use of resources. They become a maze to manage for the project team. And that's where you get sort of commitment to bad ideas and an escalation of commitment in terms of resources. And, I've seen it over and over again. Get to a tipping point, you're about to start the commercialization process. And, there's some truth tellers inside the organization going, this might be a really bad idea. But, well, we've worked on it for the last 3 years. We got to move it forward, right? And, I it's one of those triggers in in a consulting sense or in, leadership roles in the past where I enter, I want to look and say, okay, so if not this, what are the alternatives? Because again, stepping back and sort of widening the aperture. And David, your comment about, you know, do they, should we, can we, will we, that scheme really does start to help simplify things, coming back to the theme that you were touching on, and kind of makes it safe then to speak a little heresy, maybe not a lot, maybe not too loud, but I'm going to be a little bit of a heretic and I'm going to say, I think we should stop.
Well, and so it's the difference between looking at something as though we've got sunk costs, right? We've invested in it, so we have to bring it live, versus penny wise, pound foolish, right? Like, you keep investing in something, even though you know that it's potentially like something has changed in the environment, something has changed from what your customers' needs are. That's just waste, plain and
so
simple.
so I'm going to take that and I'm going to pivot our attention a little bit. And David, we've been talking a lot. We've been reflecting on career path, experiences, some of the highs and lows and challenges and things we've learned. Where are you putting your curiosity at the moment as you look forward? Given where we're at today, with AI, with a lot of volatility in marketplaces, with people still hustling out there, how are you looking forward, and what's bubbling to the front of your sort of curiosity list?
Yeah, well, a couple things. One is the Testing Business Ideas book was published in 2019, and it's been wildly successful, over 100,000 copies sold in 20 different languages. But there is another book probably here somewhere, and my editor keeps asking me. So I do think there's another book soon. I don't want to say what a title is or topic yet, because I do want to make a commitment to it, because it's a large effort when you write a business book. I feel I'm getting pulled into this AI decision making quite a bit recently, And I've been trying to frame it as human in the loop, which I picked up from MIT, and maybe they coined it. But the idea of, um, I'm going to extract assumptions in this idea manually, but I'll also use maybe an LLM to extract assumptions as well. And then I'll compare and I'll find value in the edges. So there's going to be some overlap. But what I've seen in practice is there's value in some of the things that the people have found, your team member has found, and there's also some value in things that they didn't consider that maybe the LLM was able to extract. And then how do we map and prioritize that risk? Well, I've not had a lot of great success in having AI prioritize for me. And also, I think you're giving your authority away to the AI in that regards of, oh, I'm going to defer to the AI to make a decision for me. I don't think that is a smart move. I think people own the decisions. You need to be accountable for them. They're social in nature. You need to be able to share them. So what I've done instead is have people do their assumptions map, but then have with some custom scripting, have it give feedback as if I would on the map. So if I'm not in the room, what are things like I would give you? Obviously, like, oh, all our risk is feasibility, and we don't have any risk around the customer or pricing. That's a red flag for me. So I would give that feedback
Yeah.
to the team. And then with experimentation, it's how do I choose an experiment? Now you could go back to the Testing Business Ideas book, and you could flip through 200 pages of experiments and try to find one that fits. I've updated my thinking since then. And also, I think having something AI powered that can help you select based on the risk. So I do have like a library that I'm licensing now where people can feed it into whatever they've built, and it selects experiments, and it's all coded and everything. So I've been really challenging myself to say, okay, here's where we're going. We're definitely, AI is not going away anytime soon. How do we use it responsibly to reduce risk? And so far, what I've seen and what gets me excited is being able to use this like human in the loop method of we're not deferring all our power to it, but it can help us de-risk if we're thoughtful about how we use it. And that's where I'm pulled into lately. It's been a sort of a whirlwind of every week a new tech, something else comes out. Like recently, I open sourced my Claude skill that people can use to run through that process for free. I've been trying to do my best to really deeply think about this and build in public with it. And I think that's where the next challenge is, because we have ideation, we have all kinds of AI for ideation, and I don't think that's the constraint inside the company is ideas. It's now how do we test those, and that's where I've been put in lately. I'm having a lot of fun there too, playing in that space.
Love it. Love
Something
it.
that you just said that I think is like a perfect way to think about AI is in the past, folks would say, insert leader's name said we should do this. And, I could imagine a period of time where it's like, well, the AI said that we should do this, and that takes that accountability away.
Or AI David said this. Like
Yes.
I asked it, what would David tell me to do?
Yeah.
And then I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's probably a good spot for us to maybe draw a line under this conversation. I want to thank David so much for, sharing your wisdom and perspective with us. If you haven't read his book, go out and read his book. And check his LinkedIn feed as well, because there is a fair dose of humor out there, which I think we can all use. Kim, it's nice to be back working with you on this stuff and having these conversations. I learn every time we do this. For everybody out there listening, thank you so much. Keep listening to The Fault Line. Find it wherever you get your podcasts, at cmgconsulting.com, or just follow us on LinkedIn and you'll see, because we post every time we publish a new episode. Thanks again. We'll be back soon, and take care of you.